Well, that went well. Hello and welcome. I'm Maria from Sew Through Time, and this time we're making an Italian Renaissance 1490s cioppa, or outer gown. In last week's video, I showed you how I made the kirtle, or gamurra, that goes underneath this. The layers in the Renaissance period that a lady would wear would be first her smock or shift, and then on top of that, she would add her kirtle. That would be basically her like petticoat and bust support layer, because they weren't wearing really stays yet at this point. And then on top of this, then she would wear her outer gown usually, unless it was a very informal at-home kind of setting. Now there is a little bit of regional variation in this time period as to what the actual kirtle would look like in the form of how the sleeve would be, and especially with the waistline. In this northern Italian region, especially in the Venice area, the waistline was significantly higher than in the rest of the world in the 1490s, whereas in most of Europe, the waistline would be at your natural waist level. To give you a little historical context to this gown, in the medieval period that came before the Renaissance, the kirtle is the basic underlayer for all women. And at that point, it is still the bust or bodice part and skirts cut in one. But as we get into the Renaissance period, they start to be split at the waist with a waist seam. And as we get further along in the Renaissance era in the 16th century, it starts to be more and more structured. In the 16th century later on, the bodice part starts to have boning in it, and that later develops into a separate petticoat and stays that we know. And later in history, in the 17th century forward, all the way up until in the 19th century, when it changes from stays to a corset. Now as for the outer gown, Venetian ladies had several different options. She could wear a really loose gown that could be belted down and it could have the sides open, or she could wear a cioppa that has a more fitted upper part, and it could have sleeves that were a part of it, or the sleeves could be a part of the under kirtle. And then this would have much fuller skirts, usually, and it could often be open in the front. It could sometimes close in the front, but oftentimes in portraits, you'll see that it opens out and shows the kirtle skirts underneath. And this cioppa style is the kind of gown that we're making today. So yesterday when I was setting out my pattern, I was going to put this bodice pieces on. In the middle of it, I decided to go get tea. And when I came back with my tea mug, I managed to slip on my ruler and fall flat on my butt. Luckily, I don't think I broke anything, but I do have an extremely sore tailbone and I got tea all over my silk. Well, apparently this is the kind of silk that can handle water. I'm glad that's now tested. And my pattern pieces are oddly crinkly because of the tea. But today I seem okay to do the pattern pieces. My tailbone is still sore, so sitting for long is not really an option. So we'll see how much of the sewing I'll get done. My quick one-day project turned into not so quick of a several-day project.
The bodice is lined in black taffeta.
Okay, so I had not planned on hand sewing this, but because right now, as you can probably hear in the background, there's a bunch of renovations going on upstairs, and my sewing room isn't really accessible, at least not with all the camera equipment and all that. And since my tailbone is super sore, I might as well just sit on the couch comfortably and hand sew this. It's not like there's a lot. So I'm backstitching the bodice pieces together.
The fashion fabric bodice pieces are sewn together, and so are the bodice lining pieces. Then the bodice lining and fashion fabric are pinned together with the seam allowances folded in between the pieces, at the center front and all along the upper edge, including the shoulder straps and arm size, and the bottom edge. Then those edges are hemmed together. After sewing the skirt pieces together, the skirt's hem is folded up twice and hemmed down. The open fronts of the skirts are folded over to the edge of the print and hemmed. The upper edge of the skirts is pinked. The skirts are gathered for cartridge plating. I whip the skirts to the bodice.
While I stitch these cartridge plates on, I wanted to take a little time and talk a little bit about the historical accuracy in costuming. And well, I personally am somebody who enjoys trying to figure out how something was made historically. I enjoy that little nitty-gritty information. I don't think that anybody has to stick to historically accurate stuff, especially if they don't want to, and I would never encourage anybody to do something that they don't want to. But of course there are events where you do need to stick to at least try to stick to what's accurate, and there's different standards for different events and so on and so on. But in general, as a rule, you do you. If historically accurate stuff floats your boat, go for it. If you prefer to do more costumey, fantasy stuff, you do that, or anything in between. But I've also noticed that because, well, first of all, historical accuracy can be a very slippery slope. We can't actually ever make fully historically accurate. We don't have the right kind of sheep, we don't have the right kind of weaving techniques, we don't have the right machinery. Things wouldn't have been for most of history, most things wouldn't have been made at home. And so on and so on and so on. But I've noticed that because I enjoy the more accurate side of things, lots of times, I've noticed that I also tend to put unnecessary pressure on myself for trying to find so-called historically accurate things. And with this project, I'm making this gown so that I can wear it and take pretty pictures when I go to Venice, because I love the Italian Renaissance, and when you think about Venice, whatever other era would you think of first than the Renaissance? So I don't even do Renaissance or medieval reenactment. There's no need for me to make this completely historically accurate. I tried to find out as much as I could about the sewing techniques and things like that, because that just floats my boat. I enjoy that stuff. But my kirtle is mostly machine sewn. It is not accurate. But still, for some reason, when I was trying to find the fabric for this outer gown, I was having a lot of problems trying to stick to the so-called historically accurate prints. Or not prints, but brocades. And not being able to find what I wanted, and I didn't have time to order online. Then I was stuck with what were in fabric stores, and I really wasn't finding anything suitable. And then when I went to the fabric store warehouse where I found this fabric from, I instantly fell in love with it. I just thought it was really pretty, and it had, like, to my eyes, a close enough feel to it that it kind of, like, gave me a Renaissance feeling, even though it's not in any way accurate. But I almost did not buy it, even though it was only €5 a yard. So it was super cheap. It's 100% silk, but because it's printed. And I was like, but I can't buy printed because they didn't have printed silk. Well, first of all, yes, we assume that they had mostly brocade, but they could have had painted silk too. We don't really have existing gowns from that era. It's too far back. There are only a few. And most of the evidence we have comes from paintings. And who's to say that that painting, yes, most likely it is a brocade, but who's to say it couldn't be a painted silk as well? And I got myself stuck in this weird, where I was like, can I use it or can I not use it? Should I not get it? And then even after buying it, I was still, but this is not accurate. I really shouldn't use this. And that's kind of a slippery slope that we end up in often. And we do that to ourselves. But I guess my point is that if you feel like that, I understand, because I feel like that often. But it's silly because we don't need to feel like that. If anybody else comes to say that to you, most likely they won't. But if for some reason somebody does, that's their problem, not your problem. As long as it's not like for a specific living history event where their accuracy is something they need, then it really shouldn't be an issue. You should be able to use what you want and what you can resource, because most of the things that they used back then aren't available to us in any way, shape, or form anyways. And accurate prints, especially the further back you go in history, when you go to medieval or Renaissance, they tend to be super expensive. And if we could only use accurate prints and accurate silks, that would exclude a lot of people from this hobby. And I think it's important that we remember that even though historical accuracy can be fun for a lot of us, it can also limit our creativity. And when it isn't necessary, sometimes it's good to think outside the box and maybe just let your creativity rule you more than sticking to strict accuracy. That's just my 2 cents on the matter. Have you ever had that feeling that you're kind of like confined to that strict space and that you feel like that is keeping you from using a fabric you'd want to use? If you have had that experience, please tell me about it in the comments below. I'd love to hear about your experiences with that, and also if you got over that. And if you don't have that problem, great. I am really proud of you, and I'd love to hear from you also in the comments down below about your experiences.
And lastly, I hem-stitched the shoulder straps together. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please hit that like button and subscribe so that I can see you again next time. Bye!